Welcome to the RotoWire Prospect Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson, and we've got a mailbag episode for you here today. Great questions this week, per usual. So thank you for those. And actually, really great questions this week. Better than usual, I would say. We're brought to you by Fantrax, per usual, and love that sponsorship with Fantrax. Definitely my favorite site to play Dynasty on. As always, around this time of the year, if you want to know my in-depth thoughts on prospects, there's a pretty good chance I wrote their outlook on the site, at least for the top 150 players or so. And then I've written a few dozen more for guys that might be up this year. You can always reach me in the RotoWire MLB Slack room or Discord room as well, or on Twitter. And if you're watching on YouTube, welcome. Hope you enjoy the video, and please subscribe and like the videos if you do. Okay, first question this week is from Todd Whitestone, my NFBC partner. I hope you're doing well, Todd. Todd wants to know, if the Cubs need an early SP this season, how would you rate Ben Brown versus Cade Horton? He also wants to know, if Will Warren of the Yankees is given an opportunity to start in the majors, how would I assess his readiness? Well, Todd and I took Cade Horton with our final pick of a RotoWire Online Championship a week ago, so I'm guessing he is wondering how I'm feeling about that pick. So Ben Brown of the Cubs, I think he would need to improve his control pretty significantly to be usable as a starting pitcher in the big leagues for them this year, which it could happen, but I'm not really holding my breath on that with Ben Brown. I do think he eventually ends up in the bullpen. And I would be probably skeptical enough of any perceived control gains with Brown until he at least turned over a big league lineup multiple times on multiple occasions, at which point he'd probably already be rostered. Horton, on the other hand, really doesn't need to do anything. I think Horton's big league ready right now, and talked about this last week with Chris Clegg, but it does sort of seem that just the way the Cubs are handling Horton this spring, that they're kind of slow playing him a little bit, with the intention of having him join the big league rotation. But I don't think they want to just have Cade Horton just max out his innings by August. Like, they want to be able to use Horton in the playoffs. So Horton didn't even get invited to big league camp. I know that there's been reporting from Lance that this is just kind of the way the Cubs do things. It's what they did with Jordan Wicks and Caleb Killian in previous seasons. So it looks to me like Cade Horton is going to join the rotation in May or June. So I'd kind of plan for that. If he's up sooner, that's great. But yeah, I think you get plenty of Cade Horton in the big leagues. It's just going to be more of a summer thing than a spring thing. As for Will Warren of the Yankees, love Will Warren. Thought he looked great the other day in spring training. I would happily add Will Warren in FAB in competitive mixed leagues if it was reported that he was getting the call. I would like him to throw to Jose Trevino rather than Austin Wells once he's up. And I wouldn't be throwing him out there against like the best offenses in the league or anything like that, at least right away. But Will Warren is definitely a mixed league caliber pitching prospect this year. I think he is big league ready too. So just a question of when the Yankees decide that it's his time to join that rotation. Maybe it's just a spot start or something like that, but very excited to see Will Warren make his big league debut this year. Trader Andy says, what's the ETA for Victor Scott of the Cardinals, and what type of impact can he make? So Scott, as many of you know, he's kind of like an old school leadoff hitter type, more batting average than OBP, not as much pop as the typical modern leadoff hitter. But he could also hit, 8th or 9th early in his career due to that lack of pop and that the lack of, a high walk rate. But he, once he is up and playing, he's going to run wild. He's going to bunt for hits. He's just a 3-alarm fire. Like whenever he's on first base or even second base, like, you're just really nervous if you're the pitcher. You kind of expect him to just go right away. And he's going to cause havoc like that ends up really kind of getting into some pitchers' heads. The thing that kind of drew me to Scott initially, over some other, similarly skilled players, is that he actually goes up there looking to pull the ball and pull the ball in the air in certain counts, which is important because a lot of these 80 grade speed guys just try to make weak contact, the opposite field, and just get on first base. That approach will work really well in the lower levels of the minors. But I really liked that Victor Scott, he didn't necessarily even need to be doing this, but he's up there. He's looking to drive the ball into the gaps, and he will hit some home runs. Like I don't think he'll be a 0 in homers. I wouldn't, he's going to steal so many bases if he hits enough to play every day that you only need him to be like a 10 homer guy to really be loving it. I think like for Victor Scott's like absolute fantasy ceiling, you could be maybe talking about like a Carl Crawford type of year or maybe a Whit Merrifield type of year. But that's kind of something you're dreaming on. I don't think that's overly realistic. Like, it could happen, but he's probably not quite as good of a pure hitter as those guys, but especially Crawford. Crawford was incredibly talented. But, it does kind of seem to me like just based on what the Cardinals are doing and how the pieces fit, it does seem like they're kind of keeping center field open for him long term. And, he's for ETA, I think spring training is going to be huge with Victor Scott. Chris and I didn't talk about him last week, but, he could make a lot of noise this spring. I don't think he would break camp in the big leagues unless maybe like Tommy Edman opens there on the IL or something like that. But if Scott has a really impressive spring training, we could see him in the first half. And, he's going to be a extremely hot commodity in roto leagues because of that speed. Bennett Carroll says, what is a realistic expectation for Colson Montgomery of the White Sox and his future? And Bennett says you have to account for him being on the White Sox in this scenario. I really feel bad for White Sox fans because every couple of months I get a question about Montgomery and I can smell their desperation for him to be a face of the franchise type of star shortstop. That's not meant to be a knock on Montgomery. I expect him to have a longish career as an everyday player. That's a really great outcome for any number 22 overall pick. I just don't see superstar upside with Montgomery. Like he's not a franchise saver. That doesn't really exist in baseball, as we've seen in Anaheim, but he's going to be good, I think. But he's not going to be a superstar. He probably fits best at third base, but they're going to keep him at shortstop as long as they possibly can. Maybe even longer than that. And he could, for what could Montgomery do? I think he's not too dissimilar from like Edouard Julien with the Twins on offense, at least with strong OBP skills, ability to hit for average to above average power, especially against righties. Like those are kind of Montgomery's carrying tools. And he's not going to get platoon like Julien has, but I'd be really pumped if I were a White Sox fan and Montgomery was turned into like a 25 homer bat that you could just hit second or third in the lineup. I mean, that's not going to be a strong lineup, so I would assume he'll be hitting there anyways. But he's good, but just don't put all your eggs in the Colson Montgomery basket. Is basically what I'm saying. L.A. Williams says, what do you believe is keeping Dustin Harris of the Rangers from cracking the majors? Will he need to leave the Texas organization? So, I mean, he's just not better than their big league options at the positions he can play. Texas is in a great position. They've got a strong farm system and a loaded big league roster, and better players than Dustin Harris have been shut out of playing time in similar situations on other teams. So, it's a little unfortunate for him that he is in such a loaded org. But he's kind of limited to, first base, maybe left field. So there's a high bar for him to clear offensively to get a look. You don't see a team as good as the Rangers give a guy with like 50 grade power go out of their way to give that guy run at first base or DH really. So he either needs to really kind of up his skill level or he does need a trade or maybe an injury to someone like Nathaniel Lowe or Wyatt Langford or something like that. But, Ezekiel Duran's still going to be kind of an odd man out once Corey Seager's healthy. So I don't really see Dustin Harris getting a look really with the Rangers. So hopefully, if you're holding Harris, hopefully he gets traded at this year's deadline. Leo, Life of Riley, of these Padres outfield prospects, and then he lists Samuel Zavala, Jacob Marcy, Graham Pauley, and Dylan Head. Who is the best near-term and dynasty value? He says he's seen Marcy mentioned elsewhere either as a sleeper or a potential bust. Similarly, Pauley has gotten some favorable notices recently. And he says Zavala and Head are further off than those two. And how does Jackson Merrill possibly switching to the outfield impact the situation? So a lot to unpack there with the Padres, young outfielders on the way. I think one or both of Marcy and Pauley. Pauley is kind of, he plays all over. So maybe he debuts in the outfield, maybe he debuts as a utility option, maybe he debuts at second or third base. But one or both of Marcy and Pauley could be up this summer. You never know. I mean, they both, they're old enough, they accomplished enough in the minors last year that them being up early this year wouldn't be crazy either, especially just looking at that depth chart. I prefer Marcy to Pauley because of like just how good he was in the Arizona Fall League. That it's a very favorable environment to put up big numbers, but he at least showed that he's capable of putting up big numbers like that. And he's a legitimate threat to steal 20 plus bases in the majors, I think. Marcy is not a burner like Victor Scott, but he obviously knows how to take a base. And Pauley is probably a safer bet than Marcy to be up this year, just because he can play all over. But I do kind of have Pauley pegged as a future utility player, whereas I think Marcy can be kind of a low end, center fielder, left fielder, whatever they want to do with him. So Jackson Merrill, it does kind of seem like Jackson Merrill has kind of leapfrogged those guys in terms of who's going to get to the big leagues first. And that makes sense because he's the most talented of those five players. He's probably, I think he's going to hold his own. He's just such a good natural hitter that I don't think Jackson Merrill would embarrass himself against big league pitching. And I like Merrill more at second base or third base, but obviously those spots are spoken for. So that's why you're seeing Merrill get work in the outfield. He can probably handle left field. Marcy, solid center fielder. So that could be maybe a long-term way they deploy things with Merrill in left, Marcy in center, and Tatis in right. Now, for the two further away guys, Samuel Zavala and Dylan Head, I don't love comps, but I do kind of like a ceiling comp with Zavala of Ian Happ. I think he could be that kind of guy for fantasy, which is, really strong OBP, doesn't really wow you with the power or the speed, but he does a little bit. And then, you're just hoping he compiles the runs in RBI because of that OBP. like Hap does. But I think Zavala is more kind of a 2025, 2026 type of guy. And, I don't know if he's, maybe he takes a step forward as a power hitter, but I don't know if he's good enough to really leapfrog the guys we discussed if they're playing well. Could be used in a trade. And then head of these guys, even really including Merrill, Head is kind of the lottery ticket guy. He's the guy with the loudest tools, but he's also just the furthest away. He's probably 3+ years away from the big leagues. So, my rankings up on the site, strongly recommend getting RotoWire.com subscription, by the way, but that'll tell you who I like the most for Dynasty. It's Merrill, then there's a gap, then it's Zavala and Marcy, and Head, and then there's another gap to Paulie. Okay, BG says, what are my thoughts on Jackson Merrill of the Padres and his potential impact this year? And then Only Sports Fans Fantasy Academy asked, what are your thoughts on Jackson Merrill of the Padres and Brooks Lee of the Twins? Can you provide some comps for both? Also, who do you think will stick at shortstop and contribute more this year? So Merrill is the better prospect than Brooks Lee, and I expect Merrill to get to the big league sooner than Lee, more because of his team's depth chart versus the Twins depth chart than anything else. But I like Merrill more for this year. I like Merrill more long-term than Brooks Lee. Merrill's not a burner by any stretch, but he's going to steal some bases, maybe 10 to 15 bases before he gets into his late 20s. Whereas Brooks Lee, I think it could be, he could be close to like a 0 in the speed department, which is tricky when you're a shortstop because most of the other shortstops are stealing double-digit bases. So that just puts more pressure on, the batting average, the power for fantasy. So if we assume Merrill is up for most or all the season, that could be fun. But I think they're kind of rushing him out of necessity more than anything, really. So it's not like I think Jackson Merrill is like poised to just really make waves in the big leagues this year. I think if he holds his own, I think that'd be an accomplishment. So, like 10 to 15 homers, 10 to 15 steals from Merrill. I think long-term, he could actually be similar to his teammate Xander Bogaerts, at least what Bogaerts showed last year with the Padres, not like peak Boston version of Xander Bogaerts, but, giving you some power, giving you some speed. Merrill could end up being one of those guys that really helps your batting average, at least at his peak, like Bogaerts does. But like short term, he's kind of more like Joey Ortiz with the Brewers, where you're just kind of maybe it's 265 with 10 homers, 10 steals, that type of thing, and probably hitting in the bottom third of the lineup. As for Brooks Lee, it's funny you asked about both these guys because my comp for both of them went to guys that they might get to play with. Like Lee could be the sort of healthy Minnesota version of Carlos Correa at his peak, not prime Houston version or anything like that, but peak Brooks Lee, if everything goes really well, he's a 20+ homer hitter who helps your batting average, maybe not quite like 280, 290, but like 270, 275, something like that. So there's a couple comps for you. Okay, Paul Max says, am I wrong to stay away from Dodger pitching prospects? They just have so many good ones. Plus, they just landed Shohei Ohtani for 2025, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, and Tyler Glasnow. It just seems like the odds are stacked against any of their prospect landing in the rotation. I know Bobby Miller beat those odds, but that just means there's even one less spot for the others. So, Paul Max, I've actually thought about this exact thing before this offseason several times. I hadn't really kind of fully sort of figured out what I think the answer to it was, but I had thought about this because you do look at that Dodger prospect depth chart. And it's like you could really talk yourself into a bunch of these guys, but when the hell are they going to actually be in that rotation? Because it's nice to have good pitching prospects in. I think the Dodgers are probably the best team to have a starting pitcher pitch for, just for fantasy purposes. But it doesn't do you any good if that guy's just stuck at AAA and never getting an opportunity, because pitchers break. And so the longer a guy's waiting his turn to AAA, the more likely it is that he gets injured before he gets to the big league. So I understand the spirit of the question. Kyle Hurd, I think, is the most obvious example of like a guy who's he might never really even be given a look as a big league starter for the Dodgers. I think he could do it. But they showed they're willing to use him out of the bullpen last year. The stuff obviously plays out of the bullpen. So I think it's probably more likely that Kyle Hurd helps fantasy teams this year as a guy that's getting you saves and wins in relief with ratios and strikeouts than actually getting spot starts for the big club. But that could happen. We'll probably get a better idea once we sort of see how they're using Hurt early in the season. Gavin Stone is another one. I think Gavin Stone's going to make double-digit starts in the majors this year, one way or another. I just think he's ready. I think he's going to be much better this year than he was for most of last year. And, enough of their pitchers come with some injury red flags that I just think there will be starts available to someone like Gavin Stone, who's waited his turn. I'm not downgrading Emmett Sheehan or Stone for Dynasty strictly because they're Dodgers and it's crowded, just because both Sheehan and Stone, they're big league ready. It is still, arguably the best team context out there for a fantasy starting pitcher. But I would have Kyle Hurt ranked higher if I thought that he was just poised to join the Dodgers rotation. And same thing with the guys behind Hurt. It's just kind of like, do you want this guy to get traded? Because then it's just faster to a big league rotation than having to wait for the Dodgers to call your number. So I definitely understand the spirit of the question. I'm not downgrading someone like Jackson Ferris, who's 2+ years away from the big leagues, because so much can happen before then. And, maybe he gets traded. But there's another Dodgers pitching prospect I want to talk about with you guys, and that's River Ryan. He was making some waves a week ago or so based on where he was ranked on some other lists. But first, I want to throw it to a message from our sponsors. So as I mentioned, you definitely want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the videos if that's where you're watching. We really appreciate that. Come hang out with me. Rotowire.com/chat is the way to get to the Discord MLB room. But one thing that's really going on in my life these days is I am on Fantrax, and I am constantly making picks in dynasty drafts. I think I've got 2 or 3 first-year player drafts going on right now. We obviously do those on Fantrax, with the exception of one league that I really wish was on Fantrax, because we've got there've just been a bunch of email threads. Like, I'm getting spam emails in my inbox from people that are trying to add these unlisted players in this other league on this other site, because they don't have any of the prospects we want in the system. So then the commissioner of that league is stuck, saying, wait, don't pick up that player. Like, we got a placeholder here. This is how you submit your placeholders. It's just a bunch of emails. They end up in my inbox. It's annoying. But that's for sites that don't play on Fantrax. If you're playing on Fantrax, you don't have to worry about any of that, because the commissioner doesn't have to add these players because they're already in the system. I'm also in the Tout Wars draft and hold on Fantrax right now. We had just an absolutely epic closer run. I think Jeff and Fred discussed it on yesterday's pod, but from like the middle of the 8th round till the middle of the 9th round, I think 10 or 12 closers went, basically. I was sitting there on the clock on Fantrax. I have Craig Kimbrell at the top of my queue. I have Paul Sewald not even in my queue. I'm like, I'm getting Craig Kimbrell here. Then Fred Zinke snipes me. He takes Craig Kimbrell. It takes me about 2 seconds to go on Fantrax, find the next best closer available. I jump on Paul Sewald, and it was kind of I was sort of tilting a little bit because I missed out on Kimbrell, and I was just like, F this, I'm getting the closer. Paul Sewald, it was so easy on Fantrax. It would have taken me probably, 30 seconds instead of 2 seconds if I'd been on other platforms. So you got to be playing on Fantrax. Sign up for free today and be entered to win an official MLB signed jersey from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/RotoWire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. Okay, so as I said, River Ryan, shouts to River Ryan of the Dodgers. He's only been working as a pitcher for a couple of years, so it's a really great story that he's even kind of in this position where he's getting ranked so high on some sites and not so high on others. Sedona says River Ryan is ranked 19th on Fangraphs and 33 on Keith Law's top 100 list. He's 375 on yours. Why are you so low on him? So as you probably know, I don't look at other lists. I trust my process. I don't want to be subliminally impacted by what I see. But I obviously saw the River Ryan frenzy on Twitter after he was ranked that high by those two analysts, both of whom I respect. Keith Law is, one of the people that I followed first, way over a decade ago when I was first getting into prospects. I know Eric's just always at a park. So, those guys, I really respect their work. I don't have personal relationships with them, but, I definitely respect their work. Now River Ryan, he's just such an interesting case because, I generally believe in the phrase, hitters will tell you how good a pitcher is. And Ryan's, and basically strikeouts and walks, right? That's how hitters will tell you. Ryan's K- walk rate, which is my favorite stat to look at. It's publicly available. It was basically mid-pack. And I don't mean just mid-pack amongst legitimate prospects. It was just mid-pack among all pitchers in whatever kind of query you want to do, whether it's Texas League, AA, whatever. So hitters were basically telling us last year that River Ryan's kind of a mid-pack type of pitcher. Now, obviously I knew he had a big fastball, good breaking ball, loud stuff. Obviously he's fairly new to pitching. But there's a reason why most converted position players end up in the bullpen. It's really, really hard to learn all the tricks of the trade quickly enough to develop as a starting pitcher. And so while Ryan's statistical output says he's a pretty boring pitching prospect in a crowded system, we've got longtime evaluators and their sources saying he's got all these plus pitches. So I understand it's a conundrum for dynasty players. I'm going to bump up my River Ryan ranking on the late March update. There's really not that big of a difference between being ranked like 375 and 175. It really kind of flattens out, around 175, 200. And so I don't want my readers to be giving him away to someone who'd offer them much more than my rank suggests. But I'm also not swayed that I should have Ryan in the top 100. I won't be stubborn about it if I see Ryan actually translating the raw stuff into a more dominant performance in the majors. But I generally rank pitchers based on what they do against hitters and not based on just the pure pitch grades. It's it's kind of like part of the reason why, I don't have Henry LaLane ranked as my number 3 starting pitching prospect because he's just forever away from the majors. So much can go wrong. I don't know how far away River Ryan is from kind of putting it all together and getting the results we'd expect from a guy with his stuff. But last year, 136 pitchers logged 70 or more innings at AA. And of those 136 pitchers, Ryan's 13.1 K minus walk rate ranked 70th. So just as mid-pack as you can get. That's me kind of explaining my process. It's also, it'd be one thing if he were like 21 years old, but he's, obviously he's 25. He turns 26 in August. So maybe he just puts it all together and I look like an idiot for having him ranked that low. I know there's been times where, we've all had bad ranks before. But I've never moved a guy up just because someone else had him ranked really high. I've never moved a guy down just because someone else had him ranked really low. So I'm not going to just do that because of those guys. I will move River Ryan up quite a bit because, as I said, it is pretty flat in that range. And, there are definitely going to be people out there that value him as a top 50, top 75 type prospect. Ev B says, how is the seemingly new approach to the way teams are handling prospects affecting your rankings, if at all? Proximity has typically been a major factor for you. Wondering if anything's changed in that regard. So I still really care about proximity, especially with pitchers, and I don't think I need to adjust the prospect rankings based on what teams are doing. It's not like all of a sudden teams are just largely jumping their 18 and 19-year-old hitters to the big leagues. There's still a developmental process that every player is going to have to go through. And, I wouldn't like Junior Caminero with the Rays, for instance. He gets a surprise call to the big leagues last year. I wouldn't have Junior Caminero ranked like 12th instead of 4th if he hadn't made the big leagues last year. Like, the talent is the talent. Junior Caminero would be a 4th ranked prospect if he never got to the big leagues last year. To me, I think for FB, for the question, the biggest impact really is, in fantasy at least, is in redraft. It's not in dynasty. Redraft players need to know the minors better than they had to 10, 20 years ago, even 5 years ago, because teams are just getting as cheap as possible. They all looked at, like, all the owners, except for some of them, the ones that actually care about, like, trying to win championships. Most of the owners looked at what the Rays were doing and they were like, well, they're barely spending any money and yet they're winning 90 games. Why don't we do what they're doing? So you have these teams trying to get as much production as they can from pre-arb players. So there's really not as much merit to just doing the kind of, I just only draft old boring guys, because there aren't as many old boring guys playing anymore. And the older you are, if you're playing, that means you're really good. So I think it's just an adjustment that redraft players are going to have to make, where you can't just completely ignore the minors anymore, because we're going to see guys keep debuting because teams are trying to get as cheap as possible. David Scott says, in a current draft, picking 480 total prospects, are there any super deep guys that you think may pop? So I get variations of this question all the time, and the answer is kind of the same. The guys who I think may pop are already ranked highly, so it's baked in to the rankings. And then there are obviously going to be deeper guys who could pop, but they're not the guys I'm expecting to pop, right? So the younger and less experienced a player is, the more that, like, a strong couple of months is going to impact their value. So like Paulino Santana, the Rangers' top international free agent signee this past January. If he's awesome in his first 2 months as a pro, that's going to mean a lot more for his stock than if some 24-year-old is awesome in his first 2 months this year at AA. So if you're looking for guys who could be big risers, who I've got ranked pretty low, look for teenagers that I've kind of already got, in that like 150 to 200 range. Use the filters on the top 400. Like I think my rankings are really good, but part of the value in the rankings is the tools that exist in the rankings. You use the My Leagues feature, use those filters, and go to hitters, go to like for age, put in like less than or equal to 20 or whatever, and you'll just get a big list of hitters who with, you know, a good couple of months could really pop. Brandon Hawker says, what's the difference between, or what are the differences between James Wood of the Nationals and James Wood now and Elly De La Cruz last year? Do you see a similar upside with both? So Elly De La Cruz was a top 10 prospect from July 2022, right when he was promoted to AA. I had Elly De La Cruz as a top 10 prospect until he graduated this past summer. James Wood peaked on the rankings at number 11 in July of 2022 when he was at single A with the Padres, and he's been in the 19 to 22 range since the end of the 2023 regular season, I should say. So obviously that tells you I'm higher, or I was higher on De La Cruz when he was at AA than I am on Wood. And really the big reason for that is just the steals. Wood is going to steal bases. Like that's part of what makes him exciting, but he's still on 48 bases in 231 pro games. De La Cruz stole 47 bases in 120 games in 2022 alone. So we're not talking about the same type of impact potential in that category. A lot of the rest of the stuff is pretty similar. Like I could see James Wood and Elly De La Cruz being pretty similar from a power and a batting average and an OBP standpoint. But I just think De La Cruz is going to steal at least twice as many bases per year than Wood. And I do think Wood will slow down sooner than De La Cruz slows down. So it's going to be way more steals for De La Cruz right away. But like 5 years, 7 years from now, that gap might even be bigger because I do think Wood eventually is going to be more of kind of like a 10 to 15 steal guy in his late 20s. All right, Michael Thomas says, what do you think Oswald Peraza's role with the Yankees is this year and into the future? So Peraza, I think, is a bench player this year, barring an injury ahead of him. And the hope is that he takes over third base or second base whenever DJ LeMahieu stops getting consistent playing time or Gleyber Torres gets dealt. I wouldn't deal Torres, but he's been in enough rumors that, you know, I think it should at least be considered a possibility. So, you know, I think Boone is going to ride with LeMahieu over Peraza until he can't really justify it anymore. And Peraza certainly wasn't good enough last year to make him reconsider that. So a bench player now, and then the hope is that he just takes over when LeMahieu kind of gets phased out. But LeMahieu's under contract for a while, so it might not even be next year that happens. Ryan Keller, I'm looking for one or two guys that have top 25 prospect potential heading into 2025, but are not currently in your top 75. Ideally, I prefer prospects with a plus or potential plus power speed combination. So if they've got plus power speed potential and they're not in my top 75, then you're either going to be waiting a long time or there are some pretty glaring flaws elsewhere in the profile. But I'll humor you. Paulino Santana, who I mentioned with the Rangers, Ty Pete, shortstop with the Mariners, and Yophery Rodriguez, outfielder with the Brewers. I think they kind of fit the general spirit of the question. You know, they've either not played at all, like Santana, have only played in the Dominican Summer League like Rodriguez, or barely played after getting drafted last year like Pete. So, you know, I don't think I can say with like confidence like Santana's got plus speed and plus power. Like I think he might. You know, Ty Pete was at the combine, so I think you could say Ty Pete has plus raw power and plus speed. And it's just a question of, you know, can he get to that raw power consistently in games? You know, how's the hit tool? And then Yophery Rodriguez with the Brewers. I'll talk about him more in a second, but you know, I think those guys fit the general spirit of your question. George Lombard with the Yankees, Eduardo Quintero with the Dodgers, Dewell Joseph with the Mariners, Rainer Arias with the Giants, Felnin Celestine with the Mariners, and Lonnie White with the Pirates are some other guys that I thought fit those general parameters of guys outside the top 75 with potentially plus power speed combinations. Danny J says, you are the high guy on Yophery Rodriguez of the Brewers. What visions of glory do you see? So Rodriguez was good at everything in the Dominican Summer League last year. He was unlucky on balls in play. He hit 253 with a 289 BABIP. 289 BABIP's really low for the DSL. Defense is bad, just so I think he probably deserved like a 300 average probably. And then I just think it's not even that I have visions of like he's going to be this player specifically. He's just too young. He hasn't played stateside yet. I don't think you can hone in that narrowly on a player's potential just based off of that. But I think he's as safe a bet as there is from the DSL crop to keep building that momentum when he comes stateside, because like the swing decisions were really advanced. Just seems like the hit tool's there. There's power, there's speed. Obviously, Milwaukee has had some success developing their international hitters in recent years, so that helps too. We're just, we're kind of in the discovery phase with the guys who've only played in the DSL. These are 16, 17-year-olds. They've got a lot of physical and mental maturation ahead, so it's not like I've got a comp on Yophery Rodriguez, but I do think based on everything he showed, this could be a guy that helps you in all 5 roto categories. It's just kind of a TBD on which are his strongest of those categories. Michael O'Brien says, can you really go wrong with the first pick in a first-year player draft this year when choosing between Wyatt Langford of the Rangers and Yoshinobu Yamamoto of the Dodgers? Also, does having a second first-round pick impact your decision with 1-1, i.e. I hold 1-1 and 1-6? How should this be approached? Well, you should definitely check out the first-year player draft blueprint article that I wrote a month or two ago, because that whole purpose of that article is kind of walk you through these types of decisions. But, at 1-6, it's easy. You take Walker Jenkins of the Twins if he's there. If Walker Jenkins isn't there, you take Matt Shaw of the Cubs, and that's kind of assuming Paul Skeens is gone. I assume Dylan Cruz will be gone. I'd take Jenkins over Cruz, but so 1-6, you're taking Jenkins or Shaw most likely. So I strongly believe Langford is the pick at 1-1 in a vacuum. I could see a scenario, especially since I don't like trading, where I've got just an absolutely loaded outfield, like just absolutely no room for Langford to possibly break in. And some of you guys do have outfields that are that loaded. I think sometimes you're more likely to send me a screenshot of your roster if it's awesome than if it's bad. But I have seen some pretty ridiculous rosters from you guys this offseason. So, if you're just absolutely loaded outfield, util, you just don't have room for Langford, and you really need pitching, I could see a case for Yamamoto there. There's also, maybe it's a points format where someone like George Kirby is more valuable than Kyle Tucker, or at least as valuable. If that's the case, then you consider Yamamoto. But I won't find myself waffling on that decision. Not that I have the first pick, but I'm a true believer in Wyatt Langford. All right, Rico S. When building a dynasty team, is it better to constantly build the bats or trade for pitching or mix a little? Specifically, I have 5 stud outfield prospects and 2 picks high in this year's FYPD. Would you take 2 of the big outfielders or 1 outfielder and Paul Skeens of the Pirates? Okay, so I like Skeens more than Dylan Cruz straight up. And it's close enough between Skeens and Walker Jenkins, who I prefer slightly to Skeens, that I'd be fine going with Skeens over Jenkins in your situation. I wouldn't take Skeens over Wyatt Langford. You got me to talk about some scenarios where I maybe would take Yamamoto over Langford. I can't think of any scenarios where I'd take Skeens over Langford, but I don't even think that's really what you're asking. In terms of your philosophical question, you can't completely ignore pitching, I don't think, when you're building. Maybe in like heavy trading leagues where there might be some weaker managers, you could maybe go that route. But I think you want to establish your core of youngish position players. That's the most important thing you got to do. But I think you should supplement that core by taking calculated shots on pitchers. And so, like I did a mock draft for Baseball America, a mock dynasty one recently, where I kind of built like a foundation of younger hitters. But I was taking a bunch of pitchers, kind of in the middle rounds of that thing, and even a couple. It's nice to have like an ace or two, and just the way these drafts go, you're ideally not paying full ace prices. You're hopefully getting guys that turn into aces, but I don't think you can just ignore pitching. And I think this, taking Skeens over a Walker Jenkins or over a Dylan Cruz, that is a calculated shot. So yeah, I think you don't want to just be too rigid, right? And you also want to pay attention to what the rest of your league is doing. Like if everyone around you is getting at least some pitching, you don't want to fall too far behind. But yeah, you prioritize young hitting above all else for sure. Jim Delaney says, do you think that Jackson Holliday of the Orioles playing second base is a long-term move or just to get him in the lineup ASAP? I think it's more of the latter. I think, shortstop defense is probably the worst part of Holliday's game. But he's still young enough that he could develop into an above average defender there. You could maybe even do that this year. But I think putting him at second base allows him to win a job on merit this spring rather than forcing the issue and playing him at shortstop over, Gunnar Henderson or Jorge Mateo, who are better defenders than Holliday at shortstop. I think we'll see Holliday play a little shortstop this year, but I'm not sure if he'll play enough to hold that eligibility into 2025, but he could get it back in 2025. So I think there's going to be some moving parts on an infield. It's definitely kind of the latter, what you said, get him in the lineup ASAP. Holliday could be like a plus defensive second baseman. So, I think it's about giving him a realistic path to win a job in the spring. Dr. Octagon Cards says Thayron Liranzo of the Dodgers has been getting a lot of buzz, but you have him ranked at the back end of the top 400. Too many catching prospects out there to roster him, or is there something there? Yeah, I mean, I think, with like, obviously not with like Adley Rutschman or anything. And I think I was the highest on Sean Murphy when he was a prospect, but for the most part, my rankings are not going to help you land high OBP, low batting average catchers. It's not something they're going to help you do. But I was too low on Liranzo in my last update. I think he should be around 200. I think he should be just behind Moises Ballesteros of the Cubs and ahead of Dalton Rushing of the Dodgers. I'm so sick of ranking Dalton Rushing. But I stand by the general sentiment of, he's a much better, Liranzo, I should say, is a much better real life prospect than a fantasy one. Real life lists, they don't care about the rules of fantasy baseball where you can only start one or two catchers. They also don't care how long it will take a player to start providing fantasy value. And Liranzo's also just much better in OBP leagues than batting average leagues, which is another reason he's more valuable real life prospect than a fantasy one, at least in batting average leagues. And so if I just said, Dr. Octagon Cards, if I just said Liranzo's upside is Francisco Alvarez, but you've got to wait 3 years for him. Like 2.5 years is the fastest he'll get up, but you probably got to wait 3, maybe even more than 3 for him to be playing enough that you would use him. But there's no guarantee that he's actually ever going to reach that Alvarez upside. Something could go wrong where he doesn't even become a big league catcher. Maybe something goes wrong and he's just not as good as Alvarez. Where would you slot that player in the rankings is kind of the question. I see the ceiling, but I also see the lead time. I see so much that could go wrong on his way there. There's so many good young catchers. Why would I be pushing this guy up into a place where he's among really talented players at other positions that I believe in? I kind of realized I was getting a little bit of deja vu with Thayron Liranzo. And I went back and checked, and Diego Cartaya's production, obviously kind of a Dodgers catching prospect who had a terrible year last year. Cartaya's production as a 19-year-old at single A was almost identical. Sorry, a fighter jet just flew over my house. Diego Cartaya's production as a 19-year-old at single A was almost identical to Liranzo's as a 19-year-old at single A. So I'm not saying, obviously, just because Cartaya stock is tanked doesn't mean Liranzo's going to hit a wall, against AA pitching, but just an example of what can go wrong. You're working on your catcher defense as much as you're working on your hitting when you're at that position. And, development obviously isn't linear, but I think it's even less linear with catching prospects than players at other positions. All right. Net Golfer 24 says, how much would you pay for Wyatt Langford in an open auction, deep long-term keeper league where you add $5 per year to his contract? I'd like to get him for $20 to $25 unless there's significant inflation. Danny J says, how do you see Gavin Williams of the Guardians doing this year in year two? I think in 2025, Williams will be getting drafted right where Grayson Rodriguez, Bobby Miller, and Yophery Rodriguez are getting drafted this year. I think he's got similar upside to those guys, and I think he's going to show it this year. He did kind of show it towards the end of last year too. Williams, he could suffer an injury, but if he doesn't get hurt, I think Williams is going to pay off his current redraft price. Clint says, 2 names I've seen mentioned early on in spring training I'm curious about as potential sleepers. Will Benson of the Reds and Troy Johnston of the Marlins. Do you see either player making their clubs and or having any value for 2024 in 12 or more team leagues? That's an interesting combination of names. I mean, he said Will Benson. I don't know if he meant someone else, but Benson's already been good in fantasy and gets drafted in all the serious mixed roto leagues out there. And Johnston is 26. He turns 27 in June. He's never played in the majors. So the Marlins are a complete mess in terms of organizational depth. So anything is possible with that depth chart, but Johnston is probably a quad A hitter. With Benson, I think league format is very important. He's much more valuable in the NFBC where there's the 2 lineup periods, or in daily leagues where you can put him in the lineup, take him out of the lineup. You really want to maximize Benson's opportunities in Cincinnati and against righties. So if you're in a weekly lineups league, there's just going to be too many weeks where you're just not going to get enough playing time out of Benson unless it's a deeper league. So I love the idea of playing the matchups if you can with Benson, but there's no guarantee that you won't want to use him for a lot of the weeks where he's just playing on the road or where he's going to face half lefties that week. But I do think he's going to strong side platoon for the Reds this year. Stuart Fairchild probably plays against lefties. Johnston, he's probably a quad A hitter. So maybe he makes the team, maybe he doesn't. Not that interesting to me. J-Dubs says, is Tyler Black of the Brewers an under-the-radar trade candidate? Wouldn't seem to have a place on a team that's going to need to rely on a potentially elite defense for run prevention. I agree with everything you said, except for the part about it being under the radar. I think the Brewers would trade Black if someone met their price. I think he's just a very difficult piece to build around since he doesn't have the power for first base or designated hitter, doesn't have the defense for third base or second base. So just a tough piece to build around and a very tough prospect to rank. David M. DiCenzo says, I doubled up on Texas starting pitching prospects, Jose Corniell and Aidan Curry in a recent rookie draft. What do you think of their long-term chances? What do you think their long-term chances are for rotation spots, given the age and health of the Rangers staff? I really love Corniell. He checks all the boxes for a future mid-rotation starter to me. And there's really not that much hype around Corniell. I particularly love his command at such a young age. It's tough to find guys that throw that many strikes and have some good pitches. He's still young enough, and he's 6'3". He could add, I think, a tick to his 94-mile-an-hour fastball. So, I mean, if Corniell were to start sitting, 95, 96, then all of a sudden we're talking about a potential number 2 starter. But, I think Corniell's great. So great job with that pick. Aidan Curry, similar ceiling to Corniell, but he's just riskier. He's missed more time with injuries. He's only got one stop on his resume where he's shown starter level command. So Corniell's kind of done it at every level. So I definitely like Corniell more, but Curry's got some upside. Jojo Despero says, which hit tool first prospects that have yet to display power do you think will start showing it this year? Well, I'd love for Ryan Rocchio of the Guardians to be that guy. I'm not really betting on it, but we can always hope. I think Jet Williams of the Mets, he's already kind of made strides there, but I do think he'll continue to keep proving doubters wrong this year in the power department. Curtis Mead with the Rays, I think, is a strong candidate here. Really, really good hit tool with Curtis Mead. I think he's more of a 2025 power breakout bet, but it could happen this year. You never know. Two guys were definitely worth watching. Max Clark with the Tigers, Dale Amador with the Rockies. They're already top 50 prospects, but if those guys get to another level with the power this year, they'll probably finish the year as top 10 prospects. But I do have 3 actual guys that I will give you. James Triantos with the Cubs. Now, he doesn't really have anywhere to play with the Cubs right now, but he's my favorite answer here. I've heard he had a really good offseason at Driveline. Obviously went there to try to get to more power because we know the hit tool is really legit. So James Triantos is my favorite answer here. But also throwing Sal Stewart with the Reds. He's a big guy. He's coming into the draft. I think everyone thought he was going to hit for a decent amount of power. I think, either this year or next year, Stewart's going to start showing that above average power in games. And then Darryl Hernaiz with the A's. I'm not talking like 20 homer juice here, but I think people could be surprised by, Darryl Hernaiz maybe hitting 15 bombs this year or next year. Obviously, he's got a really strong bat to ball ability. The Shermanimal, I don't know. Feels like there is a wide range of outcomes for Max Clark of the Tigers. How do you value those different paths to value compared to, say, a Brock Wilken of the Brewers, where it's more like one obvious path? So Clark and Wilken are definitely 2 polar opposite first-year player draft hitting prospects. I've got Clark 5 spots ahead of Wilken on the top 400 because he's got the higher ceiling thanks to 70-grade speed. There's no guarantee Clark even gets to 20 homer power, and especially in that park. But he should get to 10 to 15 homer power at least. And there's also no guarantee that Wilken makes enough contact to hit like 250 or even 245. So while I see a chance for Wilken to be a 265 hitter or so, just based on the strides he made last year in college, Wilken's hit tool is probably just as risky as Clark's power. So I think the speed, the pedigree with Clark kind of pushes him past Wilken to me, but they are really close to each other on my rankings. TODD says, any chance we see Roman Anthony of the Red Sox or Walker Jenkins of the Twins this year? If not this year, do they break camp next year? Anthony and Jenkins are both poised for late August debuts if they play to their potential this year and stay completely healthy, unless there's just no argument for any of the Twins or Red Sox outfielders to lose playing time at that point in the season. Like, they're not going to the Red Sox and Twins aren't going to just be like, all right, well, the calendar is now at the point where we can bring them up. They won't lose rookie eligibility. If there's not playing time for those guys, I don't think they'll come up, but there's usually playing time. But they have to just do, whatever the best case scenario is for like Jenkins, especially. Anthony probably comes up in late August if he's healthy. But like Jenkins just needs to really meet my very high expectations for him. And if he does that, I think we could see him in late August. And then obviously if they come up in late August, they would probably break camp next year. They could even break camp though next year if they don't come up. Maybe the Twins move on from Max Kepler or something, and they just really clear out a spot for Walker Jenkins next year, even if he doesn't come up this year, but we'll see. Trader Andy says, what can you see Austin Wells of the Yankees accomplishing in the majors this year? Biggest thing for Wells is for him to be a good enough defender behind the plate that it's not a part of the story with him. Like I could see a scenario where Yankees pitchers want Jose Trevino back there. Yankees front office wants Wells back there, and the manager's kind of stuck trying to serve both parties. So just really, it'd be nice for Wells' defense to not just be an ongoing story with like pitchers not wanting to throw to him or anything like that. In terms of the fantasy production, I'd be thrilled with like a 230 average and like 18 homers and a few steals. Obviously, I think Wells is probably a better OBP guy than a batting average guy. But I'm just not sure he's going to play enough to get to those 18 homers. So I've been taking Jose Trevino. I think I got him in one league where he goes compared to where Austin Wells goes. Obviously, a third catcher with Trevino, but if I had to take one of those two Yankees catchers at cost, I would probably take Trevino. San Francisco Giants asks, thoughts on Logan Henderson with the Brewers, Yoniel Curet with the Rays, and Reggie Crawford with the Giants? Well, San Francisco Giants and anyone else, please go check out the relief pitching prospect rankings article that I put up last week. I touched on Curet and Crawford there. Curet and Crawford, they both have ninth inning stuff, obviously. Curet needs to improve his command by like at least a full grade to get there, but Rays added him to the 40-man roster and he had like an 18% walk rate last year. So like that tells you how good the stuff is. When I first watched Reggie Crawford pitching in pro games, the very first thing I thought was like, get this guy to the ninth inning ASAP, because I don't think he's a starter. The Giants probably will try to make him one, but I mean, he's got so much durability stuff on the ledger already. He's hurt already. I think Reggie Crawford could be getting high leverage outs for the Giants by the end of this season if they moved into the bullpen right away. I don't think that happens. Again, he has to stay healthy. He's already hurt. It is nice that Crawford ditched hitting, but that was kind of already baked into where I had him ranked. So I don't think Curet or Crawford are starters, but I do think they could be just lights out relievers eventually. Logan Henderson's like the exact opposite. He's going to try to become like a number 5 starter with the Brewers. He's 5'11". He's a righty. He's got a 89 to 92 mile an hour fastball. I know the numbers at single A look good, but the stuff does not support the numbers. And I think his best pitch is the changeup. That's usually the case with guys where the numbers say they're a better pitcher than they actually are. If they've got a good changeup in the lower levels, that'll do the trick. And Henderson's heading into his age 22 season, no experience with single A. So Curet and Crawford, lights out relievers, hopefully. Henderson, at best, I think he's like an up and down swingman type. Manny Perez says, out of these players, who would be the most important player to draft for Dynasty Colt Emerson of the Mariners, Chase DeLauder of the Guardians, Roman Anthony of the Red Sox, Brock Wilken of the Brewers, and Lazaro Montes of the Mariners. Well, Manny, a great time to get a RotoWire subscription. I can tell you exactly how to rank those guys, but I'll do it anyway. Roman Anthony, Chase DeLauder, Lazaro Montes, Colt Emerson, Brock Wilken is how I have them ranked. Feel really good about Anthony at 1. Feel really good about DeLauder at 2. I feel good about Montes at 3, but I will say that Montes, Emerson, and Wilken are all in the same tier. So if you have any personal biases among those 3, you could factor that in. Matt Singer says Lazaro Montes of the Mariners or Brock Wilken of the Brewers in an OBP dynasty. Just a lot of Montes and Wilken questions. Love both those guys though. Montes over Wilken for me. Higher ceiling. He's 2.5 years younger. That said, Wilken is probably safer. College bat versus international bat. He's got upper level experience. I'd be more willing to bet on Wilken becoming an everyday player than I would with Montes. If you just said you have to throw $100 on these guys becoming an everyday player in the big leagues, I'd place the bet on Wilken because it's more likely to me that Montes gets like exposed at AA or AAA than Wilken does. But I think Montes has as high of a ceiling as you could have without having any speed. So like if Montes just rakes all year, he's going to finish the year as a top 10 prospect. I don't really see that happening with Wilken. Robert Lehigh says, does quality starts instead of wins significantly change the value for any pitching prospects for you? Not really. Maybe you could slightly bump up pitchers on bad teams, since I do slightly downgrade the close to the majors starting pitchers on teams that project to remain terrible for a while, since they're less likely to get wins. But for the most part, like the types of things that would make a player more valuable in a QS league than a wins league are the types of things that I value anyways. Going deep into games, being efficient with your pitches, remaining a starting pitcher. Like it's all baked into the rankings really. And it just, bad pitchers don't get to go 6 innings. So it's not like I've got a bunch of like good quality start options ranked in the middle of the rankings or anything like that. Chris Kessel says, I can only stash one of Bubba Chanlder of the Pirates or Noble Meyer of the Marlins for Dynasty. Which way are you leaning? I'm sure that this is not the consensus opinion, but I like Chanlder more. I think they've got the exact same upside. Either Chanlder or Meyer could finish the year as the number 1 pitching prospect in baseball. I think that's on the table for either guy. They're both on kind of a short list of guys where I could see that happening. And Chandler's he's had more success in pro ball. He's closer to the majors. He got up to AA last year. So this is definitely a case where like proximity really matters to me, because with guys that throw this hard and are this young, it's kind of a matter of when, not if, they need Tommy John surgery. So give me the guy that's closer to the majors. Ragna BTC. What do you think Michael Harris's peak will look like? Is he a potential 30-30 guy, or is he more likely to stick as a 20-20? I could see him having some 30-20 seasons, 30 homer, 20 steal seasons. Usually the younger someone is, the more likely they are to reach those really high stolen base totals. So I don't really think we should assume Harris will get to 30 steals after only stealing 20 bases his first 2 seasons. And, he might start hitting higher in the lineup. So does that mean he runs less than he was when he was hitting like bottom third? But I mean, he could get to 30. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Michael Harris went 30-30 this year. My cop-out answer, though, is that he's like a 25-25 guy at peak. Scoop says, does Junior Caminero of the Rays make a fantasy impact at the big league level this year? Yes, Caminero will make an impact at the big league level this year, but I don't know when he will. I'd be stunned if he was in the minors all season. and I'd be stunned if he didn't make an impact when he's up. By impact, I kind of mean like a 260 average and 25 homer pace. That's the type of pace I think he'll perform at when he plays. But Caminero could spend the first couple months in the minors if the older guys are all producing in the spring and there's not injuries. They've got enough depth where they don't need to call on Caminero. So I think, yes, he provides impact. Just really tough to say when that is or for how long that is, which is why I don't have any redraft shares. Artur Dominguez says, what prospect can you see shooting up rankings this year like Junior Caminero of the Rays and Jackson Chourio of the Brewers in years past? Okay, so I used the features on the top 400 that I mentioned where you can kind of isolate certain players. So I arbitrarily only looked at teenage hitters outside the top 40. And of that subset, Roderick Arias of the Yankees, Max Clark of the Tigers, Leo DeVries of the Padres, Sebastian Walcott of the Rangers, Drew Jones of the Diamondbacks. Keep going, I guess. Aidan Miller of the Phillies, Josue DePaula of the Dodgers, Paulino Santana of the Rangers, Arjun Damala of the Blue Jays, Ty Pete of the Mariners, George Lombard of the Yankees, Yophery Rodriguez of the Brewers, Johnny Farmello of the Mariners, Dylan Head of the Padres, Eduardo Quintero of the Dodgers, Joandry Vargas of the Dodgers, Jose Perdomo of Atlanta, Dewell Joseph, Seattle, Rainer Arias, San Francisco, Founding Celestine of the Mariners, kind of in descending order. Like that's kind of the clump of guys that I could see shooting up. And I obviously have them ranked in the order of kind of how likely I think it is that they shoot up. So there you go. Charlie says, how do you value prospect hitters coming off a season ended by injury, specifically Zach Veen of the Rockies and Marcelo Meyer of the Red Sox, but also just generally? I know you are not high on these guys for fantasy, but I'm hoping they will bounce back and that poor performance was due to injury. Yeah, it definitely didn't help Veen or Meyer that it didn't help them in the rankings that, I already thought they were kind of overrated before they got injured. With Meyer, it's just a ceiling issue. I just don't see a high ceiling with Marcelo Meyer. I see a pretty high floor, but he's not going to run. I think he's going to just be fine in power and OBP and batting average, very similar to Colson Montgomery. And then with Veen, I just see a very low fantasy floor, and he's missed significant developmental time now. So just generally, it's very, very player specific. Like Roderick Arias of the Yankees and Rainer Arias of the Giants, they both had season-ending injuries last year, which prevented them from logging a larger sample and climbing the rankings. But I still like them a lot. So, sorry that wasn't kind of like a one-size-fits-all response, but I mean it's just very player specific. All right, I think that'll do it for the pod. Probably I've got a bunch more questions that I will include in the article version. That'll go up on the site either today or tomorrow, but 75 minutes or so, that's not bad. As always, the RotoWire Prospect Podcast is brought to you by